And also it can do this. It can, and you stop it. So it should be very smooth. One teacher once said, if you watch a really accomplished cellist holding a note, the hand continues, even though the hand makes a move to come back, the note is not lost. That kind of sound. So the breathing just doesn't have a beginning or an end to it. Even with the exhale, at the exhale you can't quite tell where the inhale is starting again. So think of that. Don't let it catch or stop, and don't let it be uneven in length. By the way, these are all important because they correspond or relate to a state of mind and your thoughts and your emotions. So your breathing will trigger certain thoughts and emotions if it's not done in this way, and vice versa, your thoughts and emotions will change your breathing. So this is something to just be aware of ordinarily. I mean, we're talking about meditation, but in your ordinary life, when certain emotions or feelings arise, whether it's fear or desire or whatnot, you'll be able to notice changes in your breathing. Okay? And this is kind of part of the biofeedback here. So the third one, and this one, what it does to the energy, anybody want to guess? So the first one scatters the energy. The second one gets stuck. The energy gets stuck because it's not flowing. So the third one is called, in Chinese, qi breathing. It's even. There's not necessarily a sound, but still it's rough and energy filled. This is the description. So it's rough and energy. It's conscious breathing. So it could be, you ever see the kung fu movies where the master or whoever sort of hypers a little before? The breathing comes in and then it's delivered out as if through a nozzle-like. So this is a different kind. It's called force breathing or qi breathing, and it's rough. And this kind of breathing has the result of, interesting, tiring, fatiguing, because you're using energy to move the energy, and it actually depletes the energy. The energy moves by itself when you just relax and let go. This is sort of paradoxical. So to move the energy, let go, relax, and it moves by itself. This breathing mirrors what happens to the mind. When you let go of thoughts and just let them come and go by themselves, then the mind becomes quiet and still and lucid. So the breathing matches what's going on with the mind. So later, you'll see in this technique, the whole goal is to enter a state of alert relaxation. Totally at ease and relaxed. So not only is the qi circulating, but the mind is unencumbered and flowing as well. This is where we're going. Okay, the last one is called the quiet, subtle Chan breathing. There's no sound, it's very even, it's not coarse or broken. The in and out is very refined, it's continuous, and the text says like a fine spinning of thread or silk. If you ever see this, it's just unbroken, very fine, just continual movement. Texts say that you're aware, but you're breathing, but you're not aware. So you're aware and not aware at the same time. It's so natural, it's so relaxed, that you're not counting it, you're not controlling it, you're not letting it be governed by your will or your thoughts or emotions, you're just letting it do its own thing. Now I know that sounds very simple, but you'll find when you start sitting that you'll tighten up at certain times and try to control your breathing. Then you have to use this method to catch it and come back to the very natural relaxed breathing. This is close to the breathing you do when you're sleeping, unless you have sleep apnea and all those other things and you snore and so forth. But the natural breathing is your body will take in air and it will let it out in a very natural way. You don't have to think about it. I mean, maybe that's why some people have trouble sleeping, because they're worried if they go to sleep they won't breathe. So they try, if I stop, if I stop having conscious control, no, it just goes on, right? So this breathing is when you're sitting, you get your posture right, your body's very relaxed and at ease, you're doing all the physical things we talked about last week, and then you just let your breathing take care of itself. It comes in and it goes out on its own. It's not uneven, there's no sign, you're not controlling it or forcing it. And as you do this, and as you do the physical part of this, you will find the breathing, and this is the word, becomes very subtle. Very subtle and refined. Very soft. Almost as if you're not breathing. So someone who's doing this, the body is very relaxed. You look at them and you're trying to see are they really breathing or not. It's just so subtle and soft. It hardly leaves a trace. And yet you're not getting enough. You actually feel energized from this breathing. You feel like it's more than sufficient. Okay? Any questions on this one? It takes a little practice. Everybody's okay? Okay. To activate this breathing, let me just go back and mention the physical reference then. To get the breathing right, you're dropping the breathing down to here. Okay? So now we're getting into the internal part. You're bringing your focus or your concentration down to 2 inches below the navel and 2 inches inside. This is the center, the square inch I was talking about. And you can see this if you look at some of the statuary, the icons of the images in meditation. You'll almost see kind of the vectors leading to this spot. The hands are here. You have a diamond-shaped posture with the body, and the focus of concentration, like a plumb line, drops down right to there. And you look at the image and you say, well, where is the Buddha's or the Bodhisattva's eyes? The eyes are regarding off the nose, slightly open, but you can actually see the dropping of the energy and the focus and attention down to here. And that's where the breathing goes as well. So this is called dropping or sinking the breathing down to this lower part. You don't use, of course your lungs are working, but you're not trying to appear. You're relaxing your shoulders and your neck and letting the breathing drop down. When the breathing drops down there, the chi will drop down as well. And this is sort of like a little cauldron. That's where you'll start feeling the energy and the warmth coming from. Okay? And it's very natural. How do you what? How will you know if it's down there? You'll feel it. You will feel your whole body relax. You'll feel everything settle down into this area. And you'll actually feel the circulation change. Okay? And the way you can feel it not being there is get uptight. So if you tighten any part, if you tighten this part up, then it won't drop down anymore. This is what it means: walking, standing, sitting, lying down. Do not separate from this. Not this, but this. This is the center. This is where you come from. This is the origin that you're going back to. Now, this goes to your next point. You have to relax the body to do this. So you totally relax and release the body entirely. Remember, we did the posture. You have what to do with the lineup. But now, as you do this, you bring your concentration down. You consciously just let every part of your body become very soft, very supple, very relaxed. As if it was silk just hanging on a hanger. And then when you breathe in this way, the breath is everywhere and nowhere when this is happening. Now sometimes people call this both vertical and horizontal breathing. What is happening in a very subtle way, why it's so soft, why it's so subtle, and why you're still getting enough, is because you are horizontally breathing through the pores. Because the body's so relaxed, and because then the arteries and veins and the capillaries relax, and the nerves and the muscles and the tendons relax. Everything begins to open up to this very full potential of use. And then the oxygen can come in everywhere. Okay, so this is what's called the subtle breathing that can occur. And that's why if you watch people who are really meditating for a long time, it seems as if their breath has stopped. It's associated with one of the dhyanas, but it hasn't. I mean, if it did, they die, but they don't die. Actually, they look very, contented, and they actually have a glow to their face. Well, how are they getting that glow if they're not getting oxygen? Right? It's not rouge and makeup. This is the real circulation is happening at this point. This leads into a more subtle thing here. I don't want to go too far in this. We get too esoteric, and I'm telling you to stay away from the esoteric last week. But this is one of the reasons why you begin to have good health and a longer lifespan through these practices. Remember, I was mentioning my teacher's teacher who passed away at 119. He used to sit like this every day. And when you sit like this, your energy doesn't drain as much because it's very conserved. And the circulation is stimulating your whole immune system to cleanse it out naturally. And the stress, which is the major killer, sorry guys, stress is this drops down. So if you do it right, you can't be stressed out. And that alone restores health, restores energy, makes you feel like you don't have to eat as much, you don't have to sleep as much. You'll see this during meditation sessions. People who are really practicing, after a while sort of start stripping down their clothes because they have a natural warmth. They don't need a lot of clothes. And they're sleeping less. And not because they're forcing it for an all-night bash. And they're actually eating less because the energy is just so full and complete in this process. That's why, the sessions we used to do, that's why you could do it. We'd start at 2:33 in the morning with the meditation and go till midnight and get 2 hours and 45 minutes of sleep and get up again. And you're going, no way. But when you actually bring your energy down to this level, it isn't that hard. Most of us can't stay awake, throughout the day because our energy just drains so much. Okay, anyhow, yes?
I heard on the radio just today that they've done a study that showed that older people sleep worse, and that's actually causal in their memories getting worse. And I was curious as I was listening to it, whether meditators have less of that problem of poor sleep in old age. Do you have any idea?
And memory problems?
Pardon?
And memory problems? Is that was the other one?
Well, one leads to the other.
Ah.
They were saying that actually part of the reason people have dementia or whatever is because it seems like poor sleep just comes with old age. Unfortunately, the time we're living.
Mm.
They were suggesting it's biological, but now I'm wondering if it's just the results of a lifetime of a mind that's not in tune.
Yeah, I don't know. All of the older monks and nuns that I knew who had been meditating for a long period of time didn't have this problem. But that's what they call anecdotal evidence. I don't run an experiment on this. My teacher used to sleep like a baby when he slept, and when he woke up, he was totally ready to go. And the body wore out before the mind did. So I think the research on this stuff is just beginning. We're just scratching the surface of the relationship between consciousness and body as if they're two different things. That's already part of the problem, is, framing them as two different things. So it's hard to say. Run your own experiment. Let's see. You're what now, 78, 89? I remember I was with my teacher in Asia once, and we went up to this very obscure way place in the mountains, and this nun came to the door, and it was like really bright, and her eyes were just deep, sort of black almost, and clear complexion. And she didn't say a word. She just looked at my master, put her palms together, and just disappeared. And she was watching the place, and so we walked around and did what we were going to do. And then as we were leaving, I said to the teacher, "Who is that?" He says, "You don't need to know." And he said, "But I will tell you, she's 72. Now, really, she looked like 26 in terms of everything. And all she'd been doing is just sitting up there practicing, doing her thing. So now don't get your thoughts going, because she's able to do that because she doesn't want to look young and beautiful forever. She's already lost that stress thought. So therefore, she can do that. This is the irony of it. But if you want to look young and beautiful forever when you meditate, you'll just stress out. And every time in between the sits, you go to the bathroom and say, oh my God, another wrinkle, look right here. And you won't be able to sit. Okay, so enough on that. That's the breathing part, and then next week we'll go into the mind and the mental part. Can you drop the screen? We're going to project the text up onto the screen. Okay, well, that's up. Could you bring in the Mencius document? And fortunately, I had it last week with only the English, so I waited on it a bit until Iwan here volunteered to get the Chinese. So hopefully, did you get that copy? So if you can project up both the English and the Chinese, so those of you who know the Chinese can look at it and wonder how in heck they got the English out of that. Those of you who know the English will see that it's a little bit stilted because translating these texts is still an art we're working on. But I wanted to bring up this passage for a number of reasons, because where we're getting with the Han Shan material right now is a very, very important concept. The reason why the meditation is part of the exercise, besides all the sort of interesting things I mentioned to you, is really about the mind. This is about really training and disciplining the mind. It's not about the physical. It's not about longevity or health. All those are sort of interesting side benefits. But the primary purpose of doing the meditation is to get to know, first of all, to get to know your own mind. Not to become Buddha or something, but just sort of take stock of what's going on right now with my mind. Because attending to the here and now of the mind is the only door we have for changing our lives by this teaching. So it's not like, well, you're thinking past or you're thinking future, but you're actually watching the mind now as it's moving, working, doing things. Because it's from this movement that all our karma is created, that then creates the results that create the path that we're living, our destiny, and so on and so forth. So this exercise in meditation is a technique to get to observe, watch, gradually purify and cleanse and center and reclaim the mind and bring it to its full work, bring it to its full potential. So Mencius, I'm bringing this passage up because Mencius is coming out of the same tradition that Buddhism, Taoism, and many of the South Asian religions come from, which is first of all, that the human nature is whole and complete with everything it needs for completion, perfection, and understanding, and so forth. It's not deficient or lacking. This is the first thing. And secondly, at the control center of the human condition is the mind and its activities, the mind and its workings. So that all the attention then for liberation, for understanding, for everything goes to learning, knowing, understanding, unraveling, and penetrating the mind. So the emphasis is within rather than external control. The emphasis for looking and examining is to bring the energy and concentration within. There's no gate to liberation except through the unraveling, the cleansing, and the opening up of your mind to its full capacity. So this is where they're all coming from. Now, it's based on this idea that human nature is essentially tends towards what is good and wholesome and awakened and wanting to know. This is its natural tendency. So what the exercise then is in these traditions is not so much a going out to get something, but a return to recover what was inherently, intrinsically there. But for whatever reasons, and we'll go into this a little bit, it gets lost. It gets obscured. It gets covered over. And so we forget that we have this wonderful potential. And through time, as Han Shan was saying last week, through time and habits, we start to encrust it. We start to entangle it, so we hardly recognize it anymore. Yet, we know we're not whole and complete. We know, we feel a discontent. And what the Buddha is saying, Han Shan is saying, the feeling of that discontent is actually the mind longing for its liberation. So it's actually a healthy sign. So dukkha, or dissatisfaction or suffering in Buddhism, is a stirring or impulse of the enlightened mind, wanting to return. And the knowing that we're not where we should be is actually the first steps towards the return. So there's a kind of maybe dissatisfaction or discontent we come up against that's pretty deep. It's daily. It's in the sort of the background of our consciousness all the time. This kind of empty, vague, vacuous meaning, you know, we're wanting everything, but everything we get finally is worthless. You know, this kind of sense. That's actually the stirrings of the enlightened mind wanting to return. So from the Buddhist point of view, this is not a problem, but actually the beginning of a solution. This is the beginning of an awareness. So where Mencius is coming from, and I want to share him tonight, he says that he began this process when he was young, and he was able to subdue and have his mind surrendering when he was 40. You know, that's when most people are getting their PhD. So right around 40, he did it. He said, I was able to see my mind, get a handle on it, separate out what was, discern what was good and wholesome and whatnot, reclaim it. And that's the words he used, recover it. And by 40, I had that. He said, then I could be a person of the way of the Tao with no mind. Now, it doesn't mean he was stupid or he was mindless. He says, no mind, no conscious, disturbed mind that interfered with his complete reception of things the way they were. He was a person of the way with no imposing intermediate mind laying over that. So he just flowed and responded to things as they were, lived effortlessly, but did without doing, in a sense. So this is Mencius' description. Now I wanted to read the passage to you tonight because I really like Mencius, and because he's coming out of the tradition. So first he says, the statement of human nature. Person's mind, he says man's mind, it just means human. The human mind is meant naturally for this kind of humaneness, goodness. It's naturally inclined towards the good. And the path that we're inclined to walk is what's right or proper. Now he uses righteousness, but you have to remember this translation occurred in a late Victorian time. So they were taking these words out of the New or Old Testament. But what it means is what's right, what's proper. Now, the next thing he says, how lamentable is to neglect the path and not pursue it, to lose this mind and not know to seek it again. So he's saying we can, if we're not careful, lose track of our innate goodness, our innate potential, our innate inclination for purity and stillness and goodness and so forth. But he says it's really lamentable if we don't know to look for it again. Now he gives an example, which I really like. So he says when a person's chickens and dogs are lost, they know to look for them again. I mean, in my neighborhood, when Fluffy is missing, all night long, this woman is out, Fluffy, 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 calling Fluffy all night long until Fluffy returns. You know, often Fluffy's just sitting there. You know, just loving this. Right? I'd love to hear my name. And then finally, you know, she wears herself out. 3:34 in the morning, she's going again. And then when the reunion occurs, it's like, my gosh, you won the lottery. Fluffy, you're home. No, okay, this is cool. I'm not putting it down, but I'm just saying what he's saying here. You lose your cat, your dogs, your chickens. and you know to look for them again, but you lose your mind? And he says you don't know to seek for it. Now, this is really an interesting thing. Which is more valuable? Well, he's coming from an agriculture side where dogs and chickens are really valuable. But he says, much more important is your natural mind, and you don't know. So he says, the great end of all learning, of all study, is nothing else but to seek for the lost mind. Really, an interesting line. Higher education, if you want to say it, or your life's learning, should be nothing more than to recover your lost mind. Now he goes on, just to illustrate. Here's a person whose fourth finger is bent, cannot be stretched out straight. It's not painful, and it doesn't impede his business. And yet, if there's anyone who can make it straight, he will not think the way from, Los Angeles to New York is too far to go for this. Because his finger is not like the finger of other people. He wants it to be the same. So he says when the finger's not the same, he's dissatisfied. But if the mind is not like other people, meaning natural again, okay? Don't mean the crowd. It means the natural state of people. He doesn't know to feel dissatisfaction. This is called, he says, ignorance of the relative importance of things. Now he goes on and he say, how is it that some people, now again you have to read this is not material success he's talking about. He's talking success of your humanity, of your basic purpose, where you actually are living a full life because meaning and purpose fill you. Not drives and desires and ambitions, but meaning and purpose. All people are equally the same, but some are great and some are small. He doesn't mean this in a material sense. He means spiritually great or spiritually small. Those who follow that part of themselves that's great become great, and those that follow the part that's small become small. It sounds so obvious, but what he's talking about is the shallow, petty desires and ambitions that make us small by pursuing them, and the more noble or lofty, if you want, of the other. It's sort of like very straightforward. But now, he says, all follow a part of themselves which is great, some follow the part that's little. Why is that? Why do they do that? And now he comes back to the internal I was talking about again. When one thing, the senses of hearing and seeing don't think, they're obscured by external things. We follow the impulses. When one thing comes into contact with another as a matter of course, it leads us away. To the mind belongs the office of, and this is that character, si. Okay, now look at it. That's the one with the field on top and the mind underneath. Now that was translated earlier as thinking. I don't think that's what this means. Okay? To the mind belongs the office of consideration, of observation, of contemplation. Much better. And by doing that, we get a right view of things. By examining our hearts and our minds, we get the right view of things. By neglecting to think, however, by neglecting to consider and contemplate and observe, we fail to do that. These, the senses of the mind, are what, this is translated as heaven, it means natural, what is naturally given to us. It's our birthright. In Buddhism, we would say the Buddha nature. So if you stand on that part, you will advance. If you don't, blah, blah, you will go back. So again, where he's putting the emphasis, why I bring this passage up, is this shows a mind over a field. One interpretation of this is someone who is watching the field. So when the field is planted, you observe the field to make sure that the pests and so forth don't come and ruin it. And when there's weeds, you take it out. The field is also the field of one's nature. So the character here is observing your mind ground, observing your field, observing your garden, and tending to it. This is a beautiful passage, but it indicates, again, the contemplation aspect of what this tradition is about. You notice he's not talking about you do this and then you zone out, or you do this and you feel blissed out. What he's saying is you're doing this as a natural human activity to make sure you're right, to make sure you're centered, to make sure you're following your deepest and best inclinations. This kind of reflection is the reflection that's coming out of this. And why do you do that? Because your nature naturally is whole and complete. So all you have to do is be careful not to let it get out of whack. And even if it does get out of whack, you can always come back. That was the passage we read the week before, or 2 weeks before, on Cow Mountain. Remember that? Also from Mencius. Okay? So why I'm doing this is now when we go into Han Shan and Han Shan's material tonight, you'll see a parallel image going on. Mencius will say the reason why we go astray, the reason why we get off track and lose this naturalness is for two reasons. One reason is we do not watch our minds. And by his minds, he doesn't mean just this. He means your emotions, your feelings, your impulses, your habits. All of that is considered to be the mind, not just thoughts. In fact, actual sort of rational thoughts is a very, very small part of what's driving us. It's the feelings, the impulse, the emotions, the habits that are there that are actually driving us. Freud knew this, right? We still know this. Advertising knows this, guys. When's the last time you saw an ad that appealed to your rational mind? They don't. Right? They appeal to the emotions, the feelings, the habits, the fears, the anxieties, the cravings, the sense of lack. That's why they're so successful. So inside each of us, there's an advertising agency of the neglected mind working this magic on us. So the meditation process is to get a handle on that and catch it. So he says, we let these things come up and we don't grab them and we drift away, or, it mentions very clearly this, we associate with the wrong people. It's very interesting. He learned this from his mother. But he said there's two things that lead us astray. One is we don't watch over our own mind, and unwholesome things come up, and we just sort of like, oh, well, man, flow with it, not catch it. But he said the other thing is we hang around in unwholesome environments. Now, he didn't mean it at the time because they didn't have online stuff, but he's talking about where you hang out and associate. In other words, what you're bringing in through your eyes, ears, nose, and so forth. So what you watch is a relationship. You're getting where I'm going. So the images that you bring in are a kind of friendship. They're a kind of resonance you're creating and aligning your mind up with those things. Do you know the story of his mother, by the way? Anybody you're familiar with that? You know the story? What was the first environment? Yeah, traditional market. So the traditional market was not like Safeway or Andronico's. The animals were brought in live and they were slaughtered there. And so he went home and started imitating this, killing bugs and insects and worms and cutting them up. Some others said, it's not going to do. So she pulled them out of the environment. She moved. Where did she move to next? Then, as now, finding good housing is not easy. She moved next to a mortuary. And the mortuary was also out in the open. And so the dead corpses are brought in, they were arranged, and, all the stuff that was done, either cremated or so on and so forth, and all the moaning and weeping that was associated with it. So he started making little funeral pyres and burning little images and, getting depressed and burying things. And mother said, no, it's not going to work either. So then she moved next to a pretty good school, set him up for school, had good friends, good teachers. Now, study was not what we're talking about. He wasn't cramming for California exams. And he wasn't doing the SATs and the APs and all this sort of stuff. Study at that time meant you built your character around your learning. So the development of your character was in concert with your intellectual learning. Because if they were out of whack from this point of view, you would do harm to yourself or others. If you didn't have good character and you had knowledge, you could become harmful. So it was going well, and then he came home from school one day and says, I'm dropping out. Right? And his mother said, good, fine. Start an IPO, we'll make a lot of money, we'll move. No. she was working on her loom, and she took the scissors and cut the main strand of the loom, and the whole thing just fell apart. And he said, "Mother, why did you do that?" And she said, "In the same way, if you cut off the life of your learning, your development now, your whole life will be like that. You're cutting off your root." So then he went back to school, finished, became a sage, and here we have it tonight, what he wrote, right? But then the text says, if you draw near the rouge, you turn red. If you go to the coal, you'll become black. Meaning, what you hang around with will color you. So that's why she was doing this lesson. Okay, I don't mind digress so much on Mencius. It's just interesting stuff. But it's also pointing back to this cultivation of the mind where Han Shan's going to go tonight. Okay, so let's draw up some Han Shan. Take a look. If we have time, we have a movie clip to show. Okay, so what he's describing now for us is when you get to this point that you want to do the return, you want to go back and reclaim this original ground, whether you call it the Buddha nature, you call it original face, that's another language that's used. It's Bun in Chinese, the original, the root. In the Chan tradition, it's called going back to the root, returning to the source. Going back to the heart of your being. Bun Xing, okay? Anybody else know another term for this? Original nature, Fo Xing, Zi Xing. All these refer to this inherent whole capacity that's there. He says, when you do this, you will then, I'm sure we're following the text here. So he's saying, you will meet necessarily with some obstacles in doing this. You must be totally resolute. It won't work to take up this practice one day and switch another day. You have to be constant and steady with this. Eating, sleeping, wearing clothes, cultivating every day. And fearing you're not getting enlightened, dismiss it because it's not profound or esoteric enough. That's another distraction. So you just stay with it. He said all of these notions are impediments if you entertain them. Now what's the next line? What does it say? So at the outset, at the beginning, I want to make this clear. So when a situation arises, you will not have doubts or misgivings. You will not be impervious to external states until you gain some skill in your practice. What he's talking about here is really interesting. If you start with the notion that the nature is whole and complete, this is what the Buddha says on his awakening. The Buddha says, how strange indeed. All beings have this enlightened nature. All can become Buddha. Only because of confused thinking and grasping, attaching, do they cover it over and not realize it. So then, the goal for the awakening is a return. It's a going back to let go of the grasping and clarify the perceptions of the thinking. It's an actual reversal. So to do that, he's saying, you're going back rather than forward in this way. But if you go forward away from this nature and you get confused, it's because you're adding confusion and grasping daily, more and more. So samsara, moving into samsara, is a process of addition, adding on, more confused thinking, more grasping, attaching, which then triggers more anxiety, which then triggers more anxiety and grasping, and so on and so forth. And this becomes a vicious cycle. And the more you feel like you're not getting filled, the more anxious you go out to grab more, thinking this will, and it becomes this process and it accumulates. So, and this is what Fanna or klesha are, the afflictions, the disturbances, the stress, the anxiety comes from this. Now, when you go back, you're actually reversing it. So you're actually advancing through subtraction. And this is what they call learning by subtraction. You're casting off that stuff. Now here the trick is, and it's a little bit hard to express, The afflictions, the stress, the anxiety you're getting as you go forward just entangles and ensnares you more. It becomes the image I had in mind. Again, I go back to the Hobbit trilogy. You've all seen the movie? Remember when one of them gets caught by the spider, and the spider just starts wrapping and wrapping and wrapping? This is samsara. But the spider's our own mind, confused, wrapping ourselves up in this way. And the more you do it, the more you get wrapped up, you become paralyzed and immobilized. If you want to reverse that, you have to unwrap it. So in the going back, even though you're subtracting, you have to then face every one of these things that you set up, see through it, put it down, and then move on to the next, move on to the next. So often the beginning stages of cultivation aren't this just sort of blissful, liberated joy, like, oh, I just decided to cultivate and meditate, and I'm really happy, and it's, no. It means you have to go and unpack and unravel all those things that you created. That path, although it's affliction, is an affliction that will end affliction. The texts say, many small difficulties of this ends with great ease. The opposite, many easy adding-ons going forward, ends in great difficulty. So the idea here is what he's preparing us for. He says, when you begin to cultivate the way, your afflictions, these states, are going to rise up. This is good. This is good because that's the only way to get liberated. That's where he's going with this passage. So he says, that's why he says at the outset, I want to make it really clear that when these situations arise, you won't be able to deal with them unless you have some real skill. Now let's look at the next one. He said, afflictions will flood your mind seemingly from nowhere. For example, suddenly lust or craving will surge, or you become despondent or moody. And all manner of hindrances seem to, it's not sail. I don't know how to get sail. It's a sail. That's not Chinese, by the way. The sail is not there. That's an English error. All manner of hindrances will ensnare you, so much so that your mind is exhausted and your strength is depleted. You feel helpless. Now, we were talking about this last night. Many people who go to meditation sessions or begin this identify with this process. And at that point, make the mistake of thinking, I must be doing something wrong. And that's why these texts are so important as grounders for meditation. You're not doing something wrong. You're actually doing something right. Because what's coming up are these states that you've created, and now you're going back and you're having to face them, and you're facing them with a kind of, how shall I say it? If you're going down the stream with the flow of the water, it's pretty cool. Turn the boat around, and you're going against that current being your habitual tendencies, a little tougher. It's a little tougher, right? It's the same image. So what he's saying now is be ready for this. When it comes, be able to discern and see it clearly. Don't be turned by it. It's actually part of the healing return process. How difficult is it? Depends how creative you've been in setting up the snares and entanglement. Now, I should say there's another element we're going to get to, and that is these snares, these klesha, they're called in Sanskrit, found now in Chinese, also have associated with them identity. So why we feel moody and depressed, or why we feel these things happening, isn't just because these are sort of things coming at us, these afflictions, but they're afflictions that we've invested in. We've carved our identity around them: anger, jealousy, longing, dissatisfaction, stress, so on and so forth. Over-agitated, hyper, depressed, and despondent. I could go through, there's a list of these. All of these states are states that we have created, in a sense, a house for ourselves. We've constructed a personality and a life around these. My teacher used to say, I would say, oh man, Master, my afflictions are just so heavy. I just want to get rid of them. Why can't I get rid of them? And he said, because you love them. Because they're your good friends and you've made friends with them. You love your anger. when your anger arises, it's not anger, it's righteous indignation for you. And he's saying, you've built your identity around these things so that they're actually, you think they're you. And so in addressing them, there's going to be resistance by the ego to let go of these. You're going to feel, and the texts are really great about this, you're going to feel like a child in a sense, helpless, not sure of yourself, a little awkward and vulnerable. And this too is part of the healing process. So it's not like we just sort of haphazardly add these things thinking, I want to add suffering. We haven't done it. We've added it because we thought it was going to gain us some advantage in our lives. These emotions, these negative things, we felt as if they were going to give us some leverage, that they were going to work. And often they do work in some ways. We're able to use them to manipulate situations to immediately get some things what we want. Let's say passive aggressive. It works. Men use violence or the threat of violence. Now this from the Buddhist point of view is klesha. But early on, bullies learn that if they pound on people, they will get their way. And after a while, they don't even have to pound, they just have to threaten. And how do they threaten? They start to lose their temper. And this lets everybody know that if you don't accord with them, the next thing that's going to come is verbal, physical, emotional violence, and so you yield. And from the bully's point of view, oh, it works. I got my way. That's why the Buddha says, you are not punished for your anger. You're punished by your anger. You're not punished for your hatred, you're punished by your hatred. You're not punished for your greed, you're punished by your greed. This is very much like Dostoevsky's idea of crime and punishment, that the retribution is in the emotion itself, not in something that comes to you from an external agent. But the problem is that we use these things, they work. I'm just going through a few, but if you think about all of the afflictions and you look at them and say, which ones do I have? And you don't have to raise your hand. I'm not asking this, a rhetorical question. I don't have many at all. In fact, all the people in this room, I have the least. That's called the affliction of arrogance. Just so you recognize it, okay? If you look at them, you realize that you took them on because they were a strategy that worked for something. They seemed to solve a problem. Let's say addiction, okay? Why did I start smoking, drinking, and whatnot? Well, because it seemed to relieve stress. Oh, so it seemed to work to solve a problem. But in solving that, it also created this other problem that's now become a habit, and so your mind and body are not clear because, and this is how it works. So that's why it's when you reverse these things, you're not just going against obvious things that aren't healthy. You're going against things that you made an investment in that seem to work for you in some way. And so the ego is saying, oh, if you let go of your anger, your toughness, or if you let go of your manipulation and passive aggressive, you're not going to be you. You're going to be weak and vulnerable, and people are going to run all over and blah, 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 and the whole thing goes. So this is how psychologically, psychospiritually this works, why it's so hard to do this, right? So again, what he's preparing us for is to say, when you do this return, get ready. Get ready for this and know in advance that it's coming. And last night it was a beautiful discussion we had. People actually were reading it. We read the text. We went ahead to the next passage where he's very clear about this. And then somebody asked, how come when I cultivate this stuff happens to me? And I was like, oh my gosh, there's the text that just described it. We all just read it. And we made no connection between what the text was telling us. Be aware in advance this is going to happen and the actual state that it happened. So we had to read the text over 2 or 3 times. I'm like, oh, he's talking about that. Oh. And I was saying, I remember my teacher would lecture this to us. And the next day, I would be in that state, completely not following, and I couldn't think, how did I get there? Somebody should have given me some instruction on this. I mean, wow, I don't understand. My teacher would say it again, and I'd have it for maybe 5 minutes. The next state would arise, and because the habit energy is so strong, that even when you see this, part of the mind is closing it off and doesn't want to hear it. It's really interesting. So there was one instruction my teacher gave about that, and he kept giving it for 15 years I got it. And finally, on the last day of the 15th year, I realized, wow, this is great. I understand it. Then I was like, why didn't he ever tell me this before? Why did he wait 15 years? But Han Shan and I kept notebooks. I went back in my notebooks, and there it was. Every third page for 15 years. I'd written it down, written it down, written it down. But only after X amount of time was I able to actually really appreciate and understand it. Okay, let's just hint ahead a little bit. And this is important, we'll go into this next week. Where do they come from? He says, these are the seeds of habituation stored for innumerable aeons in the deepest layer of our consciousness. And now they are surfacing, activated, accelerated by the intensity of your own cultivation. This is really interesting now, because what he's saying is, these things that arise when you begin to cultivate spiritually, these resistance and obstacles, are actually seeds that have been long buried in the depths of your consciousness that will eventually mature and ripen on their own and continue to take you down this course. But now you're confronting them early, you're preempting them, you're going into the ground. This is called the storehouse consciousness, the alaya consciousness, the deepest reserve of our memories, thoughts, and feelings, the storage place. You're going in there before they turn into something, and you're trying to weed them out. So that's what's happening, what he's describing here. So as you begin to go into meditation, as you start, meditation is just one exercise. The layers of consciousness gradually go deeper and deeper and deeper. You go from the ordinary to what's called an intermediary, finally into the eighth. And when you're into the eighth consciousness where these seeds are, that's when the real work begins. And it's these seeds that carry over through that consciousness from life to life. Now, I'm sorry if I bring up a kind of awkward subject of, future lives, let's say day to day. It's these seeds that carry over. They're like genetics, in a sense, the gene that then generates the form in the next time. So these are called bija in Sanskrit. So what you're doing in the cultivation process is you're going in and sorting through these seeds in a very early phase. But there's going to be a lot of resistance to it. So when the Shurangama Sutra says, when you meditate, let's say it's like a room that's filled with dust. If you look at the room now, if the light comes through, you can see the dust floating. As you calm and clarify, the dust will settle. And the air is very clear. But then you have to go to the next stage. You have to then get the dust out. Or you could say in water, water stirred up is murky, but then if you let it still, it gets to the bottom, but it's still there. Now the seeds are that bottom that you go into in this next level of your cultivation. I know this is a lot of theory tonight, and we're not going to get a chance. We don't have time for the movie. Okay, so what the movie is, give you a teaser, a trailer for next week. There's this wonderful section from a Japanese filmmaker, Kurosawa. Some of you are familiar with him. And he's got a series of vignettes or dreams he had growing up. And because he coming from a Buddhist Shinto tradition, he has mapped out in these movies or these scenes parts of his psyche or consciousness in a cultivation sense. So this one dream that I'm going to show you next week, we don't have time for tonight, is a dream vision of what it's like to cultivate, to go against these obstacles. And it's a really interesting sort of graphic presentation, almost like metaphor, but when you see it, you will realize, in fact, that's how you felt if you were doing this cultivation process. It's really quite nice. By the way, he was probably one of the greatest filmmakers ever, I would say. And the reason he was that way is because he didn't listen to his parents. Now, we did Mencius and we did the filial child, and that's all good and well. But sometimes your parents, if they're not awakened, you don't want to listen to them. And I know I say this to a lot of my Chinese students, and I have to point out the Buddha was not a filial child in the strictest sense, right? Think about it. What did the parents have in mind for the Buddha? To become a sage and enlightened? No. They wanted him to run the company, run the country. He was the prince. And he sort of said, that sucks. That really looks dumb. I'm not going to do it. And he went off. He cut his hair, gave up everything, and went off. From the Indian context, this is really egregious. And hence we have the Buddha. Now, of course, he went back, took care of things with his parents afterwards. But they were really bummed for a long time. So Kurosawa, what was he? He's a great filmmaker, right? I mean, his films will last and last and last. If you haven't seen his work, take a look at it. But what was he supposed to be? A filmmaker. His parents said, oh, great filmmaker it is. Anybody know what he was supposed to be and he was pushed to be? Not a businessman. Even worse. Huh? Who said that? A lawyer said that, yes. They kept pushing him to be an attorney. I mean, you think about it, he might have been a great attorney, but we wouldn't have had these films. So, seeds. Some seeds are afflictions you get rid of, but some seeds are actually the seeds of your own nature, and you have to let those blossom. So part of the meditation process, you'll get to see which one's you, which one's not you. Might surprise you, certainly probably surprise your parents. Any questions? I'm sorry I spent so much time on the theory tonight, but it's really important to get a handle on this because as you go into the meditation practice, you will have the tools for discernment. So when things arise, you realize, oh, I'm not doing it wrong or something like that. Actually, I know what I'm doing. This is part of the process. They described it, and then you'll learn how to deal with it, and it'll be much easier to meditate. But if you just sit and cross your legs, I mean, that's what I did. Before I met a teacher, I just went into the mountains. Took some food and water, went in the mountains. I was going to get enlightened with my backpack. And it was all good until I met one obstacle. Myself. Just sitting there with my mind, I had no idea what to do with it. It was like a cage of monkeys. I had no way to, and I'd go from high to low and all over the place. It was absolutely bananas. And I realized in my humility, I can't do this by myself. I need some method. I need a teacher. I just heard that story about the Buddha sat under the tree. I could go sit under a tree in the Sierras, and it doesn't work. Method and discernment through these things are very important. Now, eventually you can do that, but get the basics down first. That's why we're spending time with the text. Okay? So next week we'll do the movie right off, start, so don't be late. And then we'll unpack that as well. Announcements? Questions? Save for next week, I guess, because it's getting a little late. So, Chinese New Year.
Yeah.
What about it?
It's celebration.
This is a Chinese New Year time. And I never understood it, but it's sort of like Christmas, Thanksgiving, and New Year's all in one, right? So it's big time. And it's coming up this weekend.
Tomorrow is the New Year Eve.
Tomorrow's New Year's Eve.
And Sunday is the very first day of the New Year.
So it's more like not just one day, it's a number of days.
Like the 15th day.
Uh-huh.
We celebrate 15th day.
And we're celebrating what?
The reunion of the family.
Ooh. Okay. No comment. I'm not going to editorialize on that. Okay, we're going to do the transference in English.
Actually, one announcement is actually Sunday there will be a ceremony here at 9 a.m. if people are interested in it, some kind of Chinese, it's more kind of a Chinese New Year celebration. We'll send Om Mani Padme home and have a couple of talks, and then have lunch. That's pretty much it. So that's 9 a.m. to about 1 p.m.
We'll give you a little break from the family.
Yeah, that's Sunday. And I think on the next, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday, our Master Chu will be coming to give a lecture. That's something very worthwhile.
Dharma Master Chur is a nun from our tradition, probably the one longest in robes, who was also a close disciple of my teacher. So she has a lot of experience. She's English, not English, she's Ohio, which is a state next to the one that is primo, which is Wisconsin. So she's, but she's a Midwesterner who early on met the Master and became a nun. And she became a nun. She had a son at the time, so that's an interesting story how she dealt with that and worked through that process. And she's now situated in Australia, has a monastery there that she teaches, but she goes back and forth. So Hung Sure went to Australia to her place, and she came to this place. So they go back and forth and exchange. So if you have the opportunity next Saturday, it'd be a good experience to hear her and maybe ask her some questions.